I want to welcome everybody and thank you very much for attending. My name is Mary Goody and I'm a board member of Friends of Clark County. And I want to welcome you to the future of forests and trees in Clark County in light of climate change. It's our very first forum for January 2025, and hopefully we will continue on with this subject throughout the year. We come together for this particular forum in a time of deep uncertainty among people doing climate-related work that relies on government funding and cooperation. We are, as a group, excited to support our new Public Lands Commissioner, Dave Upthegrove, and with his new ideas on science-based approaches to timber harvests in our state. This forum represents a totally new agenda based upon our recent work regarding the preservation of the Dabbler legacy forest units. Our climate action group in Clark County is particularly concerned about meeting our carbon capture goals and addressing the House Bill 1181 requirements. We have reached in our world our 1.5 degree global milestone. And the big question now is, what does this mean for us? What does this mean for us locally? We are going to have 3 wonderful panelists this evening. And after they give their presentations, we will have a question and answer period. And following that, we will give you a list of action items. During this presentation, if you have a question, you can put it in the chat and Carissa will respond to you. We will save all these questions. I doubt we'll have time to get to all of them. And following the presentation, the recording and the slides will be available to you on our website and through an attendee email. So I wanted to tell you a little bit about myself. I am a licensed private investigator. I'm semi-retired. I've always had a deep interest in forestry and forests because I was raised in the great forests of northern Minnesota and rarely spent time in town in my adult life. And I am very pleased today to be able to moderate this forum for you. I want to tell you a little bit about our panelists this evening. We have Joshua Wright from the Legacy Forest Defense Coalition. We have Hunter Decker, who is our county forester here in Clark County and is in the Public Works Department. And then we have Adela Miller from Friends of Trees. And each of these people will speak for 15 minutes. And after their presentation, we will begin the Q&A period. So again, thank you so very much for caring about this subject and our work. And with that said, I think we could begin our panelist presentations. Let's start with Joshua Wright. Josh, take it away.
Thank you, Mary. So today I'm going to talk about legacy forests. And my name is Joshua Wright. I work for the Legacy Forest Defense Coalition, and we are a group that focuses on improving the management and expanding the protections for old forests, generally on the west side of the Cascades on state lands. We've been active. The legacy forest movement, I would say, has been active since about 2020, and our group was founded in 2023. And we primarily do litigation against DNR, and now we're moving into a more collaborative space where we're trying to work with DNR to better protect legacy forests. But there's still a lot of work to do, as we'll get to. You can shift over to the next slide here. So legacy forests are forests they're native forests, and that means that they retain significant genetic, biological, and structural and functional legacies of natural and old growth forests. So basically, these forests aren't timber plantations. They are anything but. They are not necessarily old growth either, so they may have been logged once or twice, but They're rich, diverse ecosystems, generally over 100 years old. In that picture, you can actually see the Dabbler Legacy Forest that was auctioned off yesterday to a timber company, and that is one of the forests that we are working to protect. And Friends of Clark County and Legacy Forest Defense Coalitions are both suing the DNR, requesting that that sale be canceled. If you want to go down, I can talk through some of the legacy forest characteristics. Next slide. They're very species rich, so our organization has identified numerous rare plants and rare plant communities within these timber sales. And really, unlike plantation forests, they have diversity of species. They have patchy canopies, so that means that they are areas where trees have fallen over. There are horizontal trees that are on the ground. There are snags. There are trees with broken tops that may be regrown, and that's what you would call structurally complex. And they contain significant legacies of original forests, so they'll have old-growth trees in the Colt Burn area, which is where Dabbler is. You'll have a lot of old-growth snags and down nurse logs from the original wildfire. And crucially, legacy forests were allowed to grow back on their own, so these are not plantation forests. The next slide, you can see sort of the visual difference between a plantation forest and a legacy forest. And the way you can think of this is legacy forests are best thought of as our best bet for future old growth forests. Right now, as most people know, we've pretty much logged old growth forests in the lowlands of Western Washington and even in the Cascades to oblivion in many areas. And legacy forests have been allowed to naturally come back and are native ecosystems, and they are a once-in-a-generation opportunity to have the old-growth forest of tomorrow. So in this picture, you can see sort of the structural complexity. You can see there's probably about a 50-inch cedar tree right there. I'm leaning on a big downed log in the background. You can see hemlock regeneration. And in the other image, you can see a pretty homogeneous forest with a few sticks that have fallen over. And that's the difference between a plantation forest and a legacy forest. And once a legacy forest is gone, these forests were originally logged before the era of pesticides and herbicides, and before oh, it looks like I was just muted. Okay. Yeah, these legacy forests regenerated before nursery grown seedlings were common, so they were never replanted, never sprayed with herbicides, and you can really see that stark difference in what these forests look like. In the next slide, you'll see a shot of Clark County, a map of Clark County that shows where the remaining legacy forests are. If you want to go to the next slide. Oh, maybe go one more up. Go to the slide above that one. Yeah, there you go. So the areas in green that you can see are structurally complex forests. Oop. Looks like the slides are flicking around a little bit. Anyway, yeah, the green areas are legacy forests, and you can see how few of those there really are in Clark County. In the very top upper corner, you should be able to see the Susan Creek area. The gray lands are DNR lands, so you can see that disproportionately these older forests are located on DNR managed land. Yeah, it looks like the slide is still on the plantation versus legacy. So maybe can we go back to the map? There we go. There are some structurally complex forests in the lower areas of Clark County, but most of them are in the northern section of DNR managed land, which is called the Susan Cougar Creek block, and that's where the Dabbler timber sale is located. As you can see, very, very few of these older forests are left, and this is not a map of old growth forests. This is a map of everything that's complex. So that would be old growth forests and younger legacy forests. So that's really what we're working with in Clark County. There's very little left here, and we need to prioritize protection of what little remains and the restoration of larger blocks of that old forest habitat. The rest of Clark County, and really the rest of Western Washington, has been intensively logged, and you can see that on the next slide. You can see some of the practices that have really eliminated structural complexity from the landscape. So one of these images is a satellite photo of privately managed timberlands, and you can see that nearly all of privately managed timberlands grow trees on 40 to 50-year rotations. So not only do they spray these areas with herbicides and really homogenize them, but they do so in a manner that never even regrows forests to 80 years, let alone 100, 120 years. That's how old Dabbler is, about 120 years old. On the logging operation that you can see on the other photo is actually a DNR logging operation. DNR says they don't clear cut, and I can let you judge for yourself whether you think that's a clear cut or not. The DNR would call that a variable retention harvest because they left out 5 leaf trees that I can count. And the DNR does practice forestry somewhat better than private landowners. They do have long rotations. They do leave some leaf trees compared to that other aerial image, which is a private lands. But right now, the name of the game has been the clear-cut logging of these rare, structurally complex legacy forests. And we can skip on to the next slide. Actually, maybe we'll skip this next slide. I think we already kind of covered it a little bit, but I'll just sum it up very quickly. This is a map of stand development stages, and there we go. Are back on it? Yeah. In the lower right-hand side, you can see what an old-growth forest is supposed to look like, and on the upper left-hand side, you can see what a clear-cut typically looks like. So that's what an industrial clear-cut looks like. There are very few legacies. You see a couple small trees here and there, maybe a snag. And that's what today's forests are regenerating from, if they're lucky. Oftentimes, they have fewer what are called biological legacies than even that image. On the upper right-hand side, you can see another sort of stand beginning, and that has a lot more legacies. So there's an old-growth tree with no top. There's a couple of understory trees. There's some downwood. When logging originally happened, that is what a clear-cut looked a lot. That's what post-logging resembled, and that is sort of what we mean by legacy forests. The legacy forests that naturally regenerate from that more structurally diverse landscape to begin with. And in those industrial monocultures, you don't have nearly as many of those legacies. So we can move to the next slide, and I think have a couple more minutes left. There are a lot of reasons to protect legacy forests. Recreation is one of them. Biodiversity is a major one. But in an era of climate change, the most important reason to protect these forests is that they are some of the most carbon dense in the world. About 30% so the timber industry likes to talk about sequestering carbon in long-term wood products. And their argument is that if you cut down a tree and you turn it into 2x4s and you build a house, then that carbon is still sequestered. And that is true to a limited degree. About 30% of that carbon in a forest will end up in a house or in toilet paper or in a long-term wood product or a short-term wood product, paper products, that kind of stuff that might be burnt. But when you consider the emissions associated with logging, that number really goes down to about 15%. If forest stands remain intact, all of that carbon remains sequestered. And not only does that carbon remain sequestered, these forests continue building up higher and higher carbon stocks. And some of these legacy forests will have over 1,000 tons of carbon per acre. They are extremely carbon-dense ecosystems. And to put that into perspective, the average American emits around 15 tons. So an acre of legacy forest has as much carbon, more carbon than one human would emit in their entire lifetime in the United States. So that's a substantial amount of carbon for some of these stands. And yeah, you can go to the last slide. Right now, as I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, we're pursuing to stop a clear cut called the Dabbler timber sale in Clark County. And this sale was just auctioned off yesterday. There's been a great deal of visibility around this particular sale because it's what's called a primary forest, so it's never been logged. It's naturally regenerated from the occult era, and it's a postmark of what a legacy forest looks like. We are hoping that we can reach a settlement agreement with DNR to protect this forest, but as of yesterday, it has officially been auctioned off to a timber company. And anything you can do to contact your county commissioners to request that they put pressure on the DNR to withdraw this timber sale, or anything you can do to contact the Commissioner of Public Lands or the DNR in general to request that this timber sale be put on pause, the more likely, the greater the likelihood that we will ultimately be able to save it. So, yeah, that's the presentation. I encourage anybody who hasn't been out to the Suisun Creek area to go out there, and there's some great examples of legacy forests, and hopefully we will protect dabbler and that will remain there.
Thank you, Joshua. That was great. And I don't want you to feel like you have to rush. So if there's anything you wanted to say or a slide that you had that you wanted people to see, we can go back to that if you like.
Oh, I think that's all good. I could talk for hours about this stuff, but I'm happy to answer questions. I see somebody is putting a number in the chat. I can add the contact info for the DNR.
Right. And we will have a lot of that information at the end of the presentation. So let's move on. And to take us in a local direction, we'll next hear from Hunter Decker, our county forester.
Hi, everyone. Good evening. I'm Hunter Decker, the Clark County Forester for Public Works. It's a pleasure to be here tonight to discuss sustainable forestry management in Clark County. It's crucial as we navigate the challenge of climate change and land use planning and conservation altogether. Clark County's forests are, an invaluable resource offering environmental, economic, and recreational benefits. They provide clean air and water, support wildlife habitats, store carbon, and allow for timber harvesting. And so tonight I'm going to be covering the approach to forest management here at the county, the regulations that kind of govern our forest land, our sustainable forestry program as well, and a little bit about our open space and timber classifications, which help maintain healthy forests for future generations. Next slide, please. So forest management involves, multiple levels of government. Each is distinct, with each other. We have our federal level, which is, the U.S. Forest Service. They oversee the, national forests, including Washington's, and ensuring conservation efforts. We have our state level, Washington Department of Natural Resources, the DNR. They manage the state-owned forests and regulate private forest practices. They process the FPA applications, the forest practice applications, and enforce that forest practice Act, which is RCW 76.09. At the county level, I oversee the Sustainable Forestry Program and also administer our Clark County's Class 4 General Forest Practice Permits for land conversions. And also I manage review of incoming timber management plans for the open space and timberland classifications with the assessor's office. And then we have a city level. We have two here in Clark County. The city of Vancouver and the city of Camas both have urban forestry programs. So, they are invested in, the tree canopy, which, helps improve air quality and, reduce stormwater runoff and such. And within our urban growth areas that the county manages, you can kind of see in the map here on the side, it's small, but the kind of, not the dark gray where it says Vancouver, but the off shaded kind of brown is the urban growth area. And Clark County doesn't have an urban forestry program. So instead we are deferring to our forest practice rules, which include those Class 4 generals for areas that are considered forest land that would be converting to another use. Next slide, thank you. So with forest land conversions, we're regulated to conduct these, responsibly, which look at both the with the review, and another key thing is we process development moratoriums, which if a landowner harvests timberland under an approved DNR forest practice application without like first obtaining, they call it a conversion option harvest plan, a COHP, from the local jurisdiction being Clark County, then we put a 6-year development moratorium on it. It prevents, logging following immediate urbanization with a DNR forest practice permit if they didn't indicate that they were going to convert the land in the next 3 years. But we do have a process that will waive certain areas for a home site or other uses. Landowners can apply for that waiver under certain conditions, which most of the time involves waiving up to 2 acres of an area that was supposed to be replanted under the DNR permit for their home site. But the caveat is that they are still required to reforest the other acreages if it was harvested under the DNR permit. And any critical areas that were harvested would have to be upgraded or, higher density planting, which to meet our critical area ordinances, which the DNR would just require the minimum of 190 trees per acre on the west side of the Cascades. So with these regulations playing, a crucial role while maintaining land use practices here in Clark County. Next slide, please. So Clark County, we launched a sustainable forestry program in 2011, my predecessor, which transitions county-owned properties that are forested, that are unmanaged, to kind of an actively managed forest, because these stands were usually old plantation stands that were overly planted and then not kept up. And so improving forest health while reducing wildfire risk, and which supports biodiversity. And from that, we generate modest timber revenue to fund, certain projects on these properties. A key kind of our main flagship programs, Camp Bonneville. Camp Bonneville is originally an old military training ground, which now is serving for our model of sustainable forestry. So we're doing a lot of selective thinning and hazard tree removals to improve the forest structure, enhance the habitat, and increase, the resilience of this site. And all the revenue generated at Camp Bonneville is reinvested back into Camp Bonneville through a timber fund. The transfer agreement says that we cannot use any of that revenue, taking it into, say, like the general fund for other uses. So it has to be put back at that site. And so since 2017, when I kind of came on board, we took all these different properties and combined them into one county large forest stewardship plan. And there's a link on our website. You can download it and read more about it. And the county also did a video here I'm going to show. It's about 3.5 minutes long if you want to hit play.
Starting in 2011, Clark County began implementation of a sustainable forestry program. One example of this program is working to effectively manage Camp Bonneville forests to a healthy, functioning ecosystem to support a diversity of plants and animals. This land was transferred to the county for reuse by the U.S. Army and has a history of fires, clear cuts, and overplanting. This stand was thinned in 2012 to 2013. They were primarily thinning out the utility pole trees. The tallest had the smallest crown ratio, top heavy, easy to come down in the wind. The understory has come back nicely. As you can see, there's sword fern, some trailing blackberry, salal, and other native shrubs. Selective thinning and other techniques is part of the county's forest stewardship plan. This plan has been certified by the Forest Stewardship Council and the American Tree Farm System to comply with international protocols for sustainability. When I'm looking at an area that needs to be thinned, looking at how dense the stand is, what the age class is of the stand, what the future goals are of that unit. So taking measurements as far as diameters, heights, crown ratios, taper, all that can factor in with the statistics of what the reduction value of the volume should be in that stand or trees per acre. To keep trees healthy, the practice of selective thinning a forest stand provides growing room and more resources and nutrients for the remaining trees. And then the ladder fuels are reduced. If there's smaller branches and large brush, it could ladder up into the canopy of the tree. And then that's what starts a canopy fire, which is a lot of the times unstoppable. Removing ladder fuels, widening spaces really relieves the wildfire danger. Selective thinning and the sale of those timber products generates a modest revenue, which has been used for infrastructure improvements at Camp Bonneville, including bridges, roads, and new roofing for some buildings. Later this summer, the county plans to begin another timber sale at Camp Bonneville. That will include selective thinning and hazard tree abatement. It will be auctioned, and that will incorporate thinning, about 167 acres. It'll take a 30% reduction out of that stand, which again will provide more, growing room and release the resources for those other trees, as well as we will be removing danger trees, anywhere from a tree to a tree length and a half from all the structures and power lines, just to alleviate, potential threats. For more information about Clark County's forest stewardship plan, visit the county's website at clark.wa.gov/publicworks/sustainable forestry program.
Thanks for playing that. Hopefully that was educational. The next slide, please. So at the county levels, we recognize multiple open space categories. These classifications, through the assessor's office, it's a tax deferral program, and it supports conservation and recreation, ecological restoration projects. Clark County has these set of categories: conservation, enhancement of natural resources, stream protection, soil conservation, enhancement of recreational opportunities, and historical sites. Within those codes has the, what is required for each category. The state has more of they have a broader array of categories, that preserve more wildlife habitats and wetlands, other, aquifer things. And as far as these open space designations go, it helps, with folks that are involved in their land management, while if population growth is going on and increasing land use pressure, these folks can have the property be taxed at what this use is. Next slide, please. We also have the timberland classification, which stands on its own. It's designated private forest landowners that are 5 acres minus a 1 acre home site. So if you have a parcel that's 5 acres and you want to put a home on it, that property is no longer going to qualify because you only have a remaining 4 acres. So you would need a parcel that's 6 acres or greater to meet that bare minimum acreage of 5 acres. Now that 5 acres doesn't have to be completely managed. Now say forest practice rules, say you have a stream that goes through that property and there's a buffer that says you can't approach this much or some other sensitive habitat. That doesn't preclude that area from being included in forest land. It just precludes you from managing it. So in your management plan, that would just be, a critical area that you cannot manage, but still qualifies as acreage for the program. So I also forgot to include the other program. It's called DFL, Designated Forest Land. It's identical to the timberland program. There's the state allows the counties to merge these two programs together. Clark County has not done that yet, so we still have our timberland category that stands on its own, which involves going through comprehensive land change, so planning commission and council approval, versus the DFL, Designated Forest Land Program, which is an application fee and doesn't go through that type of review. It is just becomes taxed through the assessor's office as forest land at that point on the acreage that you specify. Next slide, please. Oh, I guess in closing, thank you for your time and attention. As we move forward, I just want to, recognize one of the guiding principles of Washington's management, and it's outlined right in the RCW that the legislator hereby finds and declares that forest land resources are among the most valuable in the state. And it goes on to say that the public and private forest lands should be managed in alignment with natural resource protection while maintaining a viable forest products industry. So I welcome any questions at the end and look forward to the rest of the slide. Thanks.
Thanks, Hunter. And now we're going to hear from our boots on the ground specialist, our tree planting expert, Adela Miller. Adela?
Hi, thanks, Mary, for the introduction, and thank you so much, Joshua and Hunter, for your presentations. I'm certainly learning a lot. And as Mary said, I'll be expanding a little bit more on urban forestry work in the county. But just to introduce myself, I'm Adela. This is my third planting season with Friends of Trees, working in the Vancouver area. And before that, I was an AmeriCorps member serving with the City of Vancouver's urban forestry program. So I'm very thankful to be working in this Southwest Washington urban forestry niche. It's definitely an amazing area to be doing this work. And yeah, I'm excited to talk about it. Good for the next slide. So Friends of Trees would love to talk a little bit about who we are, what we're all about. Some of you maybe are familiar with our organization, but we're an urban forestry nonprofit serving Oregon and Southwest Washington. And we've been around in the Portland metro area since 1989. Last year, we celebrated our 35th planting season. And this year, we'll actually be planting our 1,000,000th tree as an organization, which is super exciting. But we've been in Southwest Washington in partnership with the City of Vancouver since 2003. And our mission is to inspire community stewardship of our urban forests by bringing people together to plant and care for our urban trees and natural areas. So we're really at this very pivotal intersection between our communities and our trees. And today I'll mostly be talking about our Neighborhood Trees program, which hosts these neighborhood tree planting events in our service areas where we're going out into the community and planting large stalk trees, like 1.5-inch caliper trees that are making a really immediate difference to these communities. And we're planting them along streets and yards with the support of a very dedicated volunteer base. Yes, next slide, thanks. Yeah, so to chat about urban forestry, I think it's important for us to acknowledge that the life of an urban tree is a very challenging one. Our urban trees are subjected to all of the elements, a unique set of wear and tear that our forest trees maybe aren't, and they are also so incredibly important. We're constantly learning how important our urban trees are. They have so many benefits. I could talk about the benefits of our urban trees for this entire presentation, but I've noted some in the slide and would also like to mention that they're a really big part of mitigating something that's called the urban heat island effect, which describes the temperature difference between areas that have high concentrations of asphalt and large buildings and other impervious surfaces. So areas in our cities, these areas tend to run a lot hotter, while areas that have more tree canopy coverage and greenery tend to run a lot cooler. And the cooling shade of trees can make for a temperature difference of up to like 15 to 20 degrees, which is really stark. And urban forestry programming really involves the planting, the maintenance, and care of the trees in our urban communities, and views trees as an important part of infrastructure. They're this green infrastructure in our cities. And Hunter mentioned some of this already in his presentation, but within the county, there's a large part of the county that isn't quite captured within a city jurisdiction, but is still quite urban, the Clark urban growth area. And we've done some work as an organization in these urban growth areas and are certainly excited to continue to expand our programming into these areas that would really benefit from additional trees in the future. But we have a longstanding partnership with Vancouver Urban Forestry, and that has been a very successful partnership where we've planted upwards of 600 trees per season, for the last like 20-ish years. And the city has a set of goals related to the management of their urban tree canopy, which I'll talk more about on the next slide. So here you'll see a example of an urban tree canopy map. The one way that we can assess the health and impact of our urban trees is through a metric called urban tree canopy coverage. And it's often determined by something called the canopy assessment. And this data can be overlapped with other indexes, other sets of data, such as demographic or socioeconomic or even health data sets, to give us an idea of where we can most equitably target our planting efforts, because we want everyone to have the benefit of robust tree canopy coverage. And I'm just highlighting one tool that's accessible to everyone. It's called the Tree Equity Score. It's a tool in Canopy Index by American Forests, and this is just a map I pulled from their canopy map, where you can kind of see a bit of the canopy breakdown in Clark County at large. But I know there are current efforts to assess canopy coverage in Clark County further, which are being spearheaded by Clark Conservation District currently. So that will be very helpful in directing our tree planting efforts effectively and equitably. And to specifically note Vancouver's tree canopy coverage, their last assessment was in 2021, and it determined that the city was at 19% canopy coverage, and they have a goal to increase it to 28% by 2030. So these numbers are super helpful in creating concrete sets of goals. And yeah, we're we're thankful to be a small piece of the efforts to help the city of Vancouver get to that 28% canopy goal by 2030. Good for the next slide. So yeah, I would love to talk about what we're doing as an organization to respond to climate change and to continue to work towards increasing and protecting our urban canopy. One thing that we're doing specifically in more recent seasons is shifting to planting more climate adaptive tree species and utilizing assisted migration, which will help the trees that we plant survive in the warming temperatures due to climate change. So trees are slow growing and slow moving organisms, and their movement is limited, especially compared to how quickly the planet is warming. So we're shifting to plant more species that do well in the climate of Southern Oregon and California, which are areas that will likely see similarities to the climate of where we are currently in the future. So we're planting these trees knowing that our climate is changing and these trees will be able to thrive in a future version of our climate here today. So that is one thing that we are doing. We're also emphasizing species diversity in our urban landscape. We know that a resilient urban forest is a diverse one. And yeah, we work with our municipal partners mainly. They have tree lists, and we work with them to offer a wide range of tree selections to residents. They can pick from a wide range of species, and we keep things updated to make sure that we're accounting for things like climate adaptive species. And we also know that when too many of one species is planted, which has happened in like a lot of development, maybe like 30-40 years ago, there would be like a bunch of maples being planted in one neighborhood. It means that when a pest or disease attacks that species, it can wipe out a huge portion of the canopy coverage in that area. I grew up on the East Coast, and there were a lot of ash trees in my neighborhood. And when emerald ash borer hit, it definitely decimated those trees and left a huge gap in the coverage in my neighborhood. So I definitely see this as an important thing for us to strive towards. And a final, I guess, tenet of urban forestry that we bring into our programming is the concept of right tree, right place. So we're wanting to maximize the benefits of our urban trees by being really thoughtful about the selections that we're making and the placement of these trees. So we work really closely with our tree recipients to advocate for trees that we know will be successful. And we also advocate for the planting of large maturing trees. So as often as we can, we are trying to plant large maturing trees. We know the bigger the tree, the larger the positive impact to the surrounding area. But yeah, this forward thinking selection and placement ensures that these trees will live for a very long time. We need more mature trees, and that we also want to make sure that we're minimizing any future unintended costs to homeowners because trees here are under the jurisdiction of the adjacent property owner. But tree lists are also super helpful here, as well as other guidelines provided by municipal entities. They help us steer residents towards best possible selection. And this is just a slide that shows how we take tree list. In this instance, it's from our partners at the City of Vancouver, and we turn it into an experience where tree recipients are able to log into our tree store and see a list of trees that is very specific to their planting location. And they're able to, quote unquote, shop for a tree from a large list of trees that have been pre-selected to be successful in their spot. So really steering folks towards making really good tree decisions and hopefully doing it in a very fun and accessible way. A big goal we have at Friends of Trees is to remove barriers to trees and to a healthy tree canopy. And a big part of this is the community and municipal investment in our programming. It helps so much to have the support of partner organizations and municipal governments that this funding allows us to heavily subsidize our services. So we're able to offer low or no cost trees. And this removes a huge barrier to tree planting, as if you're buying a tree yourself from a nursery and planting it, or having it be planted through maybe a landscaping company, it can definitely cost upwards of like a couple $100s. So yeah, we really aim to offer trees to anyone who could possibly want one at their property. And we also aim to make ourselves a really easy solution then for folks who are needing trees removed for whatever reason. In Vancouver, replacing removed trees is required by city tree code in like almost all of the scenarios to support the maintenance of our tree canopy. And it's really nice that while the removal may be expensive or that we're able to assist in the replanting and have that be a really positive experience. We're also, a lot of our programming has education interwoven into it. We really want to emphasize teaching our community members about our urban forest and how to effectively care for our trees. So there's this element of shared community investment, and I think that's really important. And then we also provide ongoing support for trees, which is also a really important thing. We emphasize informing tree owners how to properly care for their trees through structural pruning and important watering practices and other maintenance practices that aid in the establishment of young trees. We host pruning events, and then we also have a summer inspector program, which I'm really excited about, which is a element of community science and involves volunteers collecting data on our recently planted trees. And then we're able to look at that data and do some reflection of our own tree planting practices, our species selection, and it's a way for us to continuously hone in on our services and make sure that we're providing effective programming while involving community stewards. So, yeah. There's a lot of ways to plant trees. So I wanted to, I guess, just mention why I think the Friends of Trees Way is so special. At the center of our mission is planting trees in community. So we're really working to engage residents, homeowners, and youth in neighborhood-based environmental stewardship practice. And we're teaching community members about the values of trees in their community. And we're working to maintain our urban forest and grow our urban forest, but also we're doing that by building a bigger community of folks who are invested in it, which I think is so, so important. Yeah, folks are able to have a really direct positive impact on their community. It gives people a really tangible way to engage with climate mitigation and just greening their communities. And it's just, yeah, I guess I'm a little biased, but I think it's just the magic of planting trees together is really special. And at planting events, we see a lot of like neighbors meeting for the first time after having lived down the street from each other for 20 years. And there's a potluck component at the end. So there's a meal shared when folks are coming back after planting trees all morning. And it's just, I think it's really special to see trees as a means of climate mitigation and a provider of all these benefits. And also in this instance, a vector for community building. And yeah, I think it's very inspiring. But that is all from me. I really look forward to answering some questions, and thank you to Friends of Clark County for having me.
Well, thanks, Adela and Josh and Hunter. That was all so impressive, this group of information. So we'll move on into our question and answer period now. But first, I wanted to just alert you all to the fact that the 7th Oregon Climate Assessment was recently published by the Oregon Climate Change Research Institute. And it was published in January of 2025 by Oregon State University. And, the executive summary of this 315-page document is quite interesting. And the long and short of it is that what we can expect, what is coming in the future, that is right around the corner, is that the average temperature in Oregon increased 2.2 degrees since 1895, and the projected increase in degrees is to go to 5 degrees of increase by 2074. And that may be a overly optimistic estimate. So we will have that information on our website, a link to that study. I think it's the most recent thing we have for our local area here. And now we'll get on into our questions. So Josh, let's start with you. Why are forests, especially old growth forests, so important for our climate and for water issues? And what other ecosystems do these forests service?
Well, that's a broad one.
Broad, I know.
I think the main answer to it is that old growth forests, locally, old growth forests store water, they attract mist, and they actually have their own rain cycle. Old growth and mature forests. But on a more global scale, old growth forests sequester a large amount of carbon. You think about fossil fuels as a main driver of emissions, but one of the other drivers of climate change is deforestation and forest loss, and also forest degradation. In the Pacific Northwest, technically there isn't any deforestation that goes on, or little technically, because when you take a piece of land and a piece of land and turn it into a farm, but there is a lot of forest degradations, and that's when you take a mature forest and turn it into a plantation forest. And older mature forests along the Oregon coast, the Washington coast, the Hoh rainforest, in the redwoods, and in British Columbia store more carbon per acre than any other ecosystem on Earth. And if you if you measure the amount of the essentially the species count per acre, there tend to be, or not the species, the actual individual life form count per acre, there tend to be more life forms per acre than nearly any other in the world in these temperate rainforests. So we're actually part of what's called the Pacific Northwest Temperate Rainforest, and it's one of the largest temperate rainforest ecosystems in the world. There's one in Tasmania. There are temperate rainforests around the UK, but they are generally an exceedingly rare type of ecosystem globally, and we are lucky enough to live in the middle of one of them.
Hunter, what are your thoughts about that same question?
Well, at the county, I look at it as, we have our state forest practice regulations, which, is separate from folks converting land to another use. And so at the county, pretty much my job is looking at folks that are turning in applications for, converting lands to another use. So if they were turning it into like agriculture, they would have to apply for that class 4 general application in order to proceed with that, which goes through extensive SEPA review and archaeological predetermination, more than likely, depending on the location. And so, our regulations are based from the state code and pretty much adhere almost identically to what the definitions are as far as the different classes of forest practice applications in the state. And that's why, another thing with our sustainable forest management, we're not necessarily, looking to have this monetary incentive. It's really about looking at the health of the forest and, seeing what needs to be done there. So the county's not looking at, doing intentional clear cuts or those things in nature. We're trying to create a more late seral, old growth type forest is our objective.
And Adela, I know you're concentrated on urban areas mostly, but tell us your thoughts about the importance of old growth forests for our climate.
Oh, I mean, they're so important. Yeah, I think like what a huge loss as if we remove them. Yeah, I mean, I think I would defer to Joshua for sure, but yeah, not only are they so important for our climate, but also just like relics of like pieces of nature that like are just such healing spaces to have exposure to. I love that I'm able to visit old growth forests, and I just feel like they're so rich and the experience is like nothing else. So yeah, I don't know if it thoroughly answered your question, but
Well, I have another one for you, and that is what are some simple measures that the average homeowner or person can take on their property to increase their contribution to fight climate change?
I'm absolutely planting a even one tree is an incredible contribution to the effort to mitigate climate change. Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really like generational decision to make. Planting like a Oregon white oak or a species that's going to be a large maturing tree that's going to stick around for a very long time and continue to provide those benefits long after we're gone. It's such a huge investment to be able to make in the future. So certainly planting a tree or as many as you can fit on your property. Yeah.
Thank you. So Joshua, tell us about Legacy Forest Defense Coalition's work fighting DNR timber sales of legacy forests.
Yeah, so there's multiple components to it. There's building support for the conservation of these places, raising awareness. The DNR timber sale program has diverse arrays of forestry. So sometimes they'll do thinning, sometimes they do tend to be more progressive than your big corporate warehouses, for instance. But most of their logging is still clear cutting, and right now they are moving from managing their lands on a longer rotation to managing them on a shorter rotation, meaning they're essentially leaning more into the plantation side of forestry, where you're talking about logging every 40 or 60 years. So building awareness of the fact that there are specific class of older forests that DNR hasn't done well at defining themselves that should be protected has been a really big a pillar of that work. And county governments are actually the trust beneficiaries of a lot of DNR logging. So county governments have tremendous power over DNR decision making. Many DNR lands can actually be reconveyed to the counties for free if the county wanted them for a park. So that's sort of one component, is working with educating people on the ground level at the county. And another level is working to hold DNR accountable to their own policies. DNR has a policy to protect rare ecosystems, but they don't tend to identify those rare ecosystems prior to harvest. So they don't send the Natural Heritage Program out there to check these areas out. So we've saved around 450 acres of legacy forest alone just by finding rare ecosystems that under DNR's policy they're not supposed to log. And us as an NGO can go look and observe these rare ecosystems in a given stand and tell that to DNR, and DNR is actually required to retain that forest. But again, they don't look for them, so that's another angle. And there's also the Habitat Conservation Plan. As a large landowner, they have a Habitat Conservation Plan from the Federal Department of Fish and Wildlife, and that ensures some degree of protections for spotted owls and marbled murrelets, along with a couple other rare species. And under the Habitat Conservation Plan, DNR laid out old forest targets. So essentially by 2060, they're supposed to have 10 to 15% old growth like forests in each planning unit that DNR manages on the west side. And currently they are not on track to meet any of those targets. So the main pillar of our work is litigation and trying to advance lawsuits to get DNR to stop targeting these oldest forests, which already represent less than 10% of the land base in most areas, and trying to get those areas protected so that they can become old growth one day.
And right here at home, we have talked quite a bit about, and it's been in the Reflector and our local newspaper, and even in the Oregonian, articles about the dabbler units and the lawsuit which has been filed by your organization, in which we have joined in. Tell us what the status is now. What does this mean for dabbler?
Yeah, so we were hoping that the new Commissioner of Public Lands would put a stay on these timber sales. He did announce that all maturation 2 timber sales, so that's a stand development stage, all timber sales in the maturation 2 stage of stand development are now deferred. However, that didn't apply to sales approved under Hillary Franz that had been approved while she was in office, and now that he's in office, they're scheduled to go to auction, but essentially were approved by the Board of Natural Resources under her administration. Unfortunately, those sales, it seems like the DNR, at least at the moment, has let it slip through, and they were auctioned this week. So that's obviously not good news. We don't expect logging to begin for at least a few months, and in those few months, we hope to reach a settlement agreement with DNR to get that area protected.
Hunter, you've put something in the chat. I haven't had an opportunity to read it, but please weigh in on this for us.
I do get a lot of questions from the public about, why doesn't staff do more? And I wish I could, but it comes from the top down. And, with our county councilors, if they tell our county manager that we need to look into having an urban forestry program within the urban growth boundary, then that directive would then be, probably sent down the chain, possibly to my manager and myself, to where we would look into that. But I can't just do that on the whim because it's not within my, work guidelines, I guess. So I really advocate folks to turn to their elected officials. We have 5 districts. You could go on to your parcel information center and look up your property. It'll tell you what district you're in and who your counselor is that represents you. And you could literally, all the county employees, if you know their name, you could send them an email. It's so like my name is Hunter, and then a period, dot, Decker, and then the @ symbol, clark.wa.gov, and you could just use that with anyone's name, and you could send them an email. But yeah, I mean, with our regulations, it's pretty strict, and what I can do as far as helping the cause, I guess. So really advocate to your counselors if you want change.
Thanks. I think that's really great information. So Josh, another question. Why, from an environmental perspective, would we want to protect plantation forests as well?
Yeah, and one thing I would say before answering that question is that if everybody on this call picks up the phone and calls the Office of the Commissioner of Public Lands and asks for the dabbler timber sale to be auctioned, and does that in the next couple of days, if they do that tomorrow's still a weekday, that would add a great deal of pressure. So I definitely encourage people to look that up, the Commissioner of Public Lands office, and just call them directly and just say, I'm from Clark County and I want these older forests to be protected. Somebody in the chat did point out that dabbler is maturation 2, which does fall into the category of sales deferred by DNR, but unfortunately that wasn't applied to the sales approved under Hillary Franz. So maybe it should. So that's something that folks can ask. And I definitely encourage, there's 38 people on the call, and if everybody does that, that's a significant amount of pressure on DNR. Another thing, I will pivot to the question. So the point of protecting, plantation forests, ecologically speaking, are not ecosystems. They're it's not like they're not ecosystems, but they're a blend between natural ecosystem and also a bit of a crop. So there's ecosystem elements. There's the riparian zones that are very biodiverse. A lot of species can live in those forests, but a lot of species can't. But from a carbon perspective, if you take that plantation forest, even if it's logged every 40 years, and oftentimes it has a very low carbon stock, if you take that forest and turn it into pavement, or turn it into housing, or a surface mine, or any of that kind of stuff, you take the carbon, which in a legacy forest would be very high, an old growth forest, legacy forest, it would have very high carbon stocks. If that's cut and turned into a plantation forest, on average, it's going to have a much lower carbon stock on that footprint of land. And if you take it to a parking lot or a surface mine, it'll have a negative, or it'll have no stored carbon on that surface. So that's the main argument for protecting plantation forests from a carbon perspective, is a little carbon is better than no carbon. And ideally, you can improve the management of those plantation forests even as they get logged, so that you do more thinning, you promote faster growth, you do longer rotations, so that there is a higher average carbon stock on those plantation forests, even if you are going to log them. And there's things that you can do to improve that. But certainly converting them out of any forest is much worse than having them as a plantation forest, from a carbon perspective.
So Hunter, what can Clark County government do, or your office, or all of the agencies who may be part of this decision? What can they do to protect forests on private lands, and also promote the growth of legacy forests in our county?
Well, one thing that private landowners can do, say that if you have a parcel that's 6 acres or greater, and say you're living on that 1 acre and you have that 5 acres, you could put it in that tax deferral program through the assessor's office. So impeding growth around you when zoning changes and taxes go up, but you don't want to change your management, from forestry, it'll stay that same tax as what you're managing it as. So that helps protect small stands. The smallest acreage is 5 acres, so it would have to take from the state level a change to make that smaller for landowners to have that incentive. Any landowners that have parcels greater than that have these legacy forests that are interested in protection, it's strictly based on. A lot of people think that it's when they go that, well, I don't want to clear cut going into the management program through the assessor's office. Well, it's based off of your objectives, your goals, not the counties, not the states. So if your goal is to create a legacy forest and have very high value large trees, then you're not going to do a clear cut on your little property. You're going to just do perpetual thinning over time, and that's going to be in your plan. So we're not asking you to come up with a plan that involves clear cutting if that's not your objective. So that's one thing that I think a lot of people think that they have to do if they go into that assessor's program, and they don't.
So how can the county help arrange land transfers from private owners to the state land trust? And what's the advantage of doing that? Either Hunter or Joshua.
Are you saying taking lands from the state and bringing it into county's acquisition for management? Is that through that reconveyance?
Yes, that's what I mean.
I've definitely looked into that. That's what my predecessor was doing as well. We have a list of some properties that we wanted to prioritize in those acquisitions. There's also the trust land transfer program, which we've applied for. That's with legislative money, involves identifying some properties that we would like to obtain from the state. So an example I've worked on is there's section of Camp Bonneville that is within the perimeter fence line that was used for training that is still in the acquisition of state land. And we've asked for a couple of times to have that transferred through that program back, but there was other properties that were picked over that one. So that still remains a state-owned parcel. With that reconveyance law, I know it's not all trust lands. I think it's certain state board lands that were acquired way back in, I want to say like 1910s or 1920s from folks that weren't paying their taxes. So then this county acquired them and the state is managing those. And so that's what Josh was saying. We could look into reconveyance of some of those properties that potentially have value that the county could put into our, management plan. Or, I don't run the Legacy Lands program. That's a different program manager. But, that's another thing to look at as well, for sure. But again, that's kind of a top-down tier thing. So advocating to the counselors to look into that would then possibly come down to us looking into that. So,
Joshua, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think reconveyance is a great tool, and I think the other side of taking lands out of state land ownership and into county ownership is also getting more lands into state ownership. And when an area is funded through TLT and gets given to the county, DNR actually buys replacement lands. Lately, a lot of replacement lands have been in Wahkiakum County, but in general, whether it be replacement lands for forests that have been protected on trust lands, so they need to buy new trust lands, or whether it be through entirely new appropriations from Olympia, getting private lands managed by Weyerhaeuser or even small forest landowners into the hands of DNR is great in many capacities. I mean, the most simple way in which it provides an environmental benefit is taking lands that would be clear cut under the minimums of state law and puts them under a habitat conservation plan that actually does have significantly greater protections for riparian zones and greater leaf tree policies. And with that comes public access, tribal access, recreation access, that kind of stuff. So there isn't a clear way to go to the state and say, hey, we want you to buy more land in Clark County. But generally contacting legislatures and expressing interest in programs like the Natural Climate Solutions Funding, which offers a way to take legacy forests on state lands, protect the legacy forests, and buy replacement lands. That's a great way to support sort of the efforts to get more of the private forests that are in a lower tier of regulations and get them managed on a much better, generally with better protections. Of course, there's still clear cutting. There's still a lot of that stuff that happens on state lands, but you'd rather be a tree on state lands than a tree on Weyerhaeuser land, because there's a lot more trees left standing on state lands. So generally, getting lands upgraded is in itself an environmental benefit, and it also prevents land conversion to non-forestry uses.
Thanks. Now we're going to make another little switch back to our urban expert here. Adela, tell us what kinds of trees work best together, companion trees. So if we want to plant for healthy stands, either in a little park area or in our own homes and our own yards, what trees work well together in light of what we think is coming?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I mean, it definitely depends on the space that you're looking to plant. But I think any species that are native to our region evolved together. So any like Oregon, I keep saying I'm a advocate of planting oak species, but the Oregon white oak species is our native oak, and planting that alongside other native understory species would create a really successful like tree guild. I think it's important to think about like the maturing, how large the trees are going to be when they're mature, but there's a lot of kind of like understory tree species like dogwoods, for example, that or vine maples that exist in the kind of the lower canopy, and then pairing those with a larger maturing tree would be great. But I think in light of climate change, we've been planting, for example, like a lot of California live oaks, blue oaks, different oak species that are native to Southern Oregon, Northern California. We've been planting a lot of incense cedar, which is part of those assisted migration efforts. And ponderosa pine has a very large native range, and we're kind of in a northern part of it. So that's also a great one to plant with the changing climate in mind. But I definitely encourage folks to lean into like a tree guild approach of a tree that will grow to be large, maturing, and then having that be surrounded by some understory plants. We've been doing that in Vancouver at a couple events in partnership with Vancouver Bee Project, where we've been planting little pollinator plants around the bases of these trees, and we've had a lot of success in the tree growing alongside these native pollinator plants. And yeah, I should have included a picture in my slide, but they're definitely frequently visited by pollinators now. So yeah, combinations like those I think are really successful.
Sorry, I was muted. Tell me what you think the future holds for Clark County in our urban area with this upcoming warming and current issues with tree die-off.
That's a great question. I see Clark County as continuing to become more developed. Just that seems like the trajectory. So I see more areas that are more densely populated, maybe more impervious surfaces and asphalt, and more reason for more expansion efforts with our urban tree canopy. I think I would love to see some tree codes that require replanting after the removal of trees on private property, and yeah, codes that really make the maintenance of our existing tree canopy at the forefront of our planning. But I hope that as we continue to become more urban, there's a push to make sure that we're doing it healthfully and alongside a lot of rich green infrastructure. So, yeah, it's my hope that we're making sure that we're creating communities that will be well shaded as the weather grows warmer, and that we're planting species that we're sure will thrive in that type of environment, and that we're planting them now so that they're established by the time a lot of these changes are really felt. Yeah.
What is your opinion, Hunter, about what the future holds for us here in Clark County with regard to our forests?
Well, like a personal or a county opinion?
How about a personal opinion from a real forester?
I mean, I grew up here my whole life. I've lived here, grew up in the Heights area. I went to school in Seattle at UW and came back here 8 years ago. And yeah, there's a lot more development. I've working at the county in 8 years doing conversion permits as well as managing the county's forest land. I see every application that comes in that identify areas as forest land that I require them to get a class 4 general and go through these SEPA process. And so I do see more growth. You look at the county has our maps online has aerials going back to, I think, 1955. And I live over in East Vancouver off of 164th. And you go back to that aerial photo, I live in a forest. No homes, nothing. Now with, urban sprawl, we just see that as East Vancouver, no big deal. But, probably the people back in the 50s were like, whoa, we don't want to see that change, with growth. But it's hard also I look at trees all the time driving by, and when you see tree mortality from the top down, that's a clear indication of drought. And you think about a home coming in and putting a well in. I don't, how many homes and how many you look at what's the carrying capacity of Clark County? No one looks at that because that's not on the rule books. That's just something we learn in science. and the communities is how much resources can we withdraw out of the ground before it becomes unstable. I don't know that answer, but it's definitely in, when you see trees that are too tightly close together and people don't want to cut that one down, there are straws in the ground competing for resources, and there's only a finite amount. And so if you want to keep that big tree, you might have to start watering it, which I have 3 big trees here in my backyard, and in the Hearthwood area where this old forest was, now there's homes and there's people that have, there's some thinning, but I see trees dying from the top down here. My trees aren't yet, thank goodness, but I put a soaker hose on them during the summer. It's a 42-inch diameter tree. People, why are you watering your tree? Well, I want resistance. I want it to be healthy during the worst times. So
Thank you.
I don't know where to stop with that. She's going forever.
I know, and we don't have very much time left, but I do want to ask you, Joshua, what can we do to support your organization?
Donating is always great. You can find us online at wlfdc.org, and I'll put that in the chat. And yeah, calling the Commissioner of Public Lands. Tomorrow is a good time to do that, or write an email asking for the cancellation of dabbler timber sale.
Yes, and we have several slides on that. So within our information here is the email for Dave Up the Grove, and so that is our call to action here in our last minute, that we would all work together. And we're hearing from you that our voices are really important. And I want to just encourage and urge everyone to just take 5 minutes and write that email, make that phone call. It doesn't have to be a great, long, scientifically based request, but we're asking people to support this call to action to save dabbler, and also just to engage with our counselors who have already sent a letter to Dave Up the Grove and to the DNR asking for more cooperation, more communication, and a better way of addressing the legacy units that we do have left here. So here is our slide on the action items. Again, a reminder that we will post this forum on our website, and that we will send an email to all of you who have participated. We also appreciate any donations you could make. We love having volunteers help us with a whole bunch of different things. And also just want to thank you all so very much, Hunter and Joshua and Adela, for being with us tonight. And we will see you all again at our next forum. Good night.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.